Bolivinaka, welcome Yakwe, Talofa, Malo, everybody. Welcome to a Just and Equitable Transition podcast, Talanoa, with the Traveling Diplomat, JJ, and I'm here with my good friend, Dr. Simon Chin Yee. Chin Yee, how are you doing?
I'm doing good, JJ.
Yes, sir. Yes.
Ready for a jet podcast. Let's go.
Yes. And you know, the beauty I like about this Talanoa podcast is as I mentioned, we're trying to put the recognized faces behind the amazing work that's been going on at the IMO. Amazing work in the sense that we're trying to push for this, this net zero framework. And that's something we want to talk about, in this podcast. But again, you are our guest and it's amazing to have you. Thank you for your time, for coming on board. And I wanted to start off with the beginnings, the origins of Dr. Simon Chin Yee and how all this started. So first one to start off our Talanoa is, who is Dr. Simon Chin Yee and what was it like growing up?
I thought you said you were going to ask any controversial questions, John. We can start it right away with who am I? I don't know who I am. I've been wondering this for decades. What are you talking about? No, thank you for that. Look, I'll say first thing is congrats on doing this Talanoa podcast as well. Way before I started the IMO, I've been looking and working with different Pacific states, and the way you guys use this art, the art of telling a story through negotiations is, I think it's moving the dial. It's actually changing the way things are happening in different UN spaces. But so here we go. We can tell this story now. I don't know. My story is I grew up in Canada, in Nova Scotia, actually. Yes, and not an island state, but an almost island state. We're a peninsula, connected to the landmass of Canada by just a small road, really. And you know what? I was always obsessed by nature and science. And so I didn't know what I wanted to do with myself in my career. When I started university, my first degree is in English literature. Which I did absolutely nothing with. But anyway, eventually through my master's, and then I started work almost immediately at the United Nations Education, Scientific and Cultural Organization. Sort of fell into that, really. So I moved to Paris, and then in that particular time, a lot of the work I was doing was focusing on launching different projects across sub-Saharan Africa. And these were on regional integration projects. So I'm a political scientist by training. So this was really looking at everything that the Horn of Africa and the West African states separately, how they could work together regionally, whether it becomes youth or communications or trade, all of these things, not climate change. I would just stress that, not environment. So then afterwards, when I decided, okay, well, maybe I'll do a PhD. I never was on my books to do a PhD at the beginning. I was like, I don't need the PhD. But then I thought maybe if I wanted to focus in on something that I've always wanted to do, and I've always been passionate about since I was a small child, that is the environment, that is nature. But what my actual career is people. And so how do I combine those two things? So I thought I can start and become more of an expert in climate politics, in environmental politics. For my PhD, I still focused on the African continent. In fact, the African group of negotiators as a whole in the UNFCCC in the lead up to the Paris Agreement. And then from there, I kind of stuck with academia for a bit. And then it was exactly 5 years ago that someone sent me the beginnings of a proposal to start looking at how to decarbonize shipping on the African continent.
Right.
And so if you had asked me, John, and you can again still, if I was going to be working on shipping and on this very technical side of things, even 5 years ago, I would have. It wasn't on the books. Let me put it that way. But then when you start working on something, as you are doing right now yourself, right? As we start working on these different technical and political aspects of decarbonizing the maritime sector, you can very quickly become very passionate about the not just the technical aspects and the importance of understanding that this industry needs to do this, but in fact working with people like yourself. Otherwise I wouldn't do it. I get to work with wonderful people across the board, across the regions of the world, in Europe, Caribbean, Pacific, Africa. Amazing.
And in those early upbringings, your early experiences, who were some of the mentors that you looked up to?
Okay, they're on my shelf behind me here. And so, honestly, a few of them as a child. There is an author called Gerald Durrell. He was a naturalist. Wonderful. Okay, so Gerald Durrell, he was a naturalist. He was a collector of animals back in the first half of the last century, right? Until the mid to the last part of the last century. And he just was like, he's one of those people as a small child that was also interested in going around the different parts of the forest near where I lived and looking at collecting animals, these sorts of things. So this really, really never left me. It's never left me. And I've got several of his books behind me on my shelf. And so that was like a key one in terms of looking through the years on the people that have worked on climate change, like Naomi Klein, like Katharine Hayhoe, like David Attenborough, these huge names, and then of course looking at the people again. I'm influenced by the reason I worked on the Horn of Africa in my PhD was that my network of scholars and academics in that region that cared so passionately about the region, but also the region it's in turmoil. It's been in turmoil for decades, right? And so going in and understanding the people that work on these regions themselves, I think is always an influence. And this is exactly the reason why now today, working with islands in the Pacific and working with islands in the Caribbean, it's exactly the same premise. It's looking and working with people who work tirelessly in order to get the voice out there and the job done.
Yeah. And I wanted to go a little bit back too. And first of all, I wanted to make a huge shout out to you. You had a podcast earlier before this one where you talked about when you were young, you wished you wanted to be when you grew up. You wanted to be 33 years old as an ichthyologist. And shout out to Off the Record podcast for highlighting that, because I think that's a really, really cool story. And please tell our viewers what was little Simon thinking of at that time, and what were the events or the inspirations that made you think that way? And look where you are now.
Thank you for listening to that. This was with the wonderful Dr. Claire Noon from the University of Galway. We had a wonderful conversation about this, and she asked me the question she asked me was, as a child, did I know that I wanted to be a climate scientist?
Yes. Okay.
The answer is no. As a child, I didn't really know what climate change was, but I did want to be a naturalist. And you said the word ichthyologist. That's what I wanted to be. So when I was eight, I was obsessed by these nature programs. I was obsessed by the books of Gerald Durrell that we just talked about. Yes. And I just thought, you know what, I don't know, I know why, because there was something other. Like, it was like, I wanted to move to the Amazon. That's why I wanted to be 33. I thought by 33, I'd be a real adult with a real job, and I could spend my time studying freshwater fish, which is what being an ichthyologist is. And so that was my dream to do this, to the point that a couple of years later, by the time I was 12, I had several aquariums in my bedroom. That was I'm not joking, I was breeding cichlids. At 12 years old, I was breeding cichlids, which is a freshwater Amazonian fish that I used to stay up all night and try and just watch, and I was just obsessed by this world. It goes deeper, John. I don't know how
please,
to go.
Please.
Because my first job when I was 16 look, so I got a job when I was 16. I worked in a fish room. I'm not kidding, a fish room selling fish. in a fish room of like 250 tanks or something like this. And I got the job to pay for my first oceanographic trip. Wow. So I went to Bermuda from Nova Scotia when I was 16 you very rarely does a 16-year-old, I think, get the opportunity to go and dive with corals and sponges in Bermuda, you know.
My head is still trying to process it. What is
It's funny, I've never thought about it in this process until this very conversation about, oh, maybe it was destiny.
Wow, that's amazing. And just to see, you know, your experiences building up to where you are now, I think it's rightly so that somehow the stars aligned for you to go on this journey. And I mean, look where you are now, Simon. I mean, you've done a lot of work. All of these experiences have built to where you are now, and so that's something amazing. It's like 16 years old in Bermuda. You already had the dream. You had a goal. You worked towards it. You know, all starting from that 8-year-old little Simon.
I know. And I say this to my students all the time, which they don't really like it when I say this, but I was like, you really have to keep your options really open. Take what's coming to you. Like, you can have some direction in how you want to your career, of course. But in fact, if you let things go more freely, who knows the next opportunity that's going to be. This is how I'm in shipping. This is, you know, it's something took me in that direction, and here we are today.
Absolutely. And so, building up, we're in the space of shipping, and Simon enters the halls of Albert Embankment.
Yeah.
Tell me, what were some of your first experiences when you walked into the halls? Because I had some really mixed feelings as soon as I walked into the IMO, and I was trying to process what was going on. How did I find my space? A lot of questions in my head. But, you know, I wanted to just see how did you feel, especially on that first day when you walked into the IMO, and what has happened since for you?
You have to understand, though, as well, John, for me, I am an academic, but I'd spent 5 years working in the secretariat at UNESCO in Paris. Yeah. Right. So I was used to working in that UN level with member states, but at the UN level. Okay. Right. And then all through, before walking into the IMO, I had many years of working with the United Nations Convention on Framework Convention on Climate Change, right. And in those huge UN spaces and these COPs or Conference of Parties that I go to, I've been doing those for years. And so it was interesting for me walking into the IMO. I don't really remember my first impression, although I can remember walking through the doors the first time. And to me, as a regulatory body, what was very interesting was how technical it was. And as a political scientist, I don't necessarily understand the technicalities behind the different proposals being discussed, but I do understand the geopolitics of it all. And what I found fascinating at the beginning was it seemed like a UN agency on a micro scale. It looked like when you are working within that climate change regime, and like too many people go to these conferences, JJ. It like literally, when I say too many people, the largest one was like 90,000 people. That's crazy. So when you walk into the IMO, it's when you have a room, everybody's in the same room. You know, it's really different. And at the beginning, you said my first impressions, because my first impressions, I didn't know anybody, nobody knew me. And so I could just watch and listen and learn. But because it's such a smaller space, I very quickly sort of understood that personalities matter. And that is very, very true at the UNFCCC too. I don't want to say that they don't, but because there's so many people and so many different technical negotiations happening at the same time, that you can get lost in it. Whereas at the IMO, there are also different negotiations, of course, happening at the same time, but it's more on a specific level where you can, and then you get to know the people in the room and who's negotiating with who or who's an expert on what. Right. And so for the good, that means that I think there are times where we can disagree, but then we can go out and grab a beer afterwards, you know what I mean? And we can be cordial or not, depending on who we're talking about. But at the same time, it also can increase tensions in the room because all of a sudden it does get personal, right? And we've seen this. We've seen this.
Yeah, I mean, it's so good again because I really wanted to, shed some light on not the differences, but just to contrast what the highlights between the COPs and the IMO. And I mean, you shared a little bit of the differences, but also something to see what connects them and what differentiates both of them, right?
There's a paper in my head on this already, John. It's one of my next projects I want to do is looking at how these different organizations work. I've now worked with or on 5 different UN agencies, and they're all different, and they operate differently. And I think that's the thing that kind of surprises a lot of the seasoned negotiators when they first walk into the IMO for the first time. Is that, wait a minute, how does this work? Like, what are we doing here? Like, it takes a moment. Genuinely, to understand how the room operates, because it doesn't operate like it operates like a UN agency because it is one, but it's not conventional in the way that it operates, and maybe that's because it's a regulatory body.
Yeah, and so when you're in the IMO space, what are some of the things that you try to look out for within the negotiations, apart from like personalities? What are some of the striking things that really gains your interest?
So the thing that I want to compare the UNFCCC to the IMO is this idea of coalition building.
Yes.
And this is really key in the IMO because we don't think about it. John, I'm turning around here because there's a book here called The Coalitions of the Climate Negotiations. My chapter in it is looking at the Africa Group. There's another chapter on AOSIS. There's a chapter on the LMDCs. So it's interesting how within the climate space, there are these formal and informal coalitions of groups that act as one. Yeah. And my PhD was looking at how the Africa Group operates and how rules and norms, so norms and values on one side and rules and regulation on the other side, influence and are formulated at both the national climate policy level and the international level, and the regime in the middle, right? And so understanding how the Africa Group of negotiators, for example, identify themselves was my work. Now with AOSIS, the Alliance of Small Island States, I have a paper out on that as well, looking at specifically that as well. How does representation of Pacific Islands, Caribbean islands, different islands in the UNFCCC space, in those COP spaces, how do they operate and how do they prioritize climate action? Now, within the IMO space, they don't exist, right? And that is so fascinating to me. But it's not that the countries aren't there, but those formal negotiating groups don't play a part. So if you're the G77 plus China in the UNFCCC, you can speak on behalf of 134 countries. Yeah. That does not happen in the IMO.
IMO, yes.
And one of the most frustrating things at the beginning of the IMO was that means every country has to say something, and I get why they have to do that, but all of a sudden every single EU country is saying
absolutely yes
the same or a similar thing, right? Because they want to get their vote counted, their voice. They have to do it, but it doesn't have to work like that. It just doesn't have to work like that. So informally, what I find fascinating at the IMO over the greenhouse gas strategy and now the net zero framework is specifically that these different groups of countries, you're part of one as well, which we can talk about. I'd like to talk about that actually.
Yes.
And I want to ask you questions. Maybe we'll flip this, Talanoa, so that I can hear about your stories, because understanding how different groups operate in that space really helps us understand how we move ambition forward or backward, because coalitions go both ways. So where you have groups of Caribbean countries that are talking to each other, negotiating with each other, groups of Pacific countries, the EU that still exists in the IMO, right? And so these different coalitions of countries or groups of countries interact, negotiate diplomatically with each other is one of the ways we can perhaps think about how in 2026 we move ambition forward, and we look at the cracks that we see over the 2025 that we haven't discussed yet. But we can, because it's important to understand those things, and then how do we then build from there? Like, who are the country parties that are holdouts? Who are the ones that need convincing? Because it's the problem with negotiations as a whole is that it's great to always be and talk to like-minded countries, the countries that are the ones that we are building bridges with, or aligning ourselves with, or we have the same sort of at least ideas of how things move forward. But we need to talk to the other people too. We need to talk to the ones that are perhaps not a holdout, but or perhaps a holdout, like how do we get on board? That's how we got the greenhouse gas strategy adopted in 2023. It was a coalition of all countries in the room, including the US, by the way.
Even the revised strategy too.
Yes.
Yeah.
Another time. It was another time, John.
The 50 plus, I still remember moments of that 50 plus, proposal, perhaps. One of the biggest proposals that was co-sponsored by, over 50 countries, that came to this revised strategy.
Yeah, can I ask you then, John, because as part of the Micronesian Center for Sustainable Transport,
shout out,
and as part of the Pacific Islands, the grouping of countries and groupings of researchers, academics like yourself. Yeah. What was your impression? How do you see these coalitions evolving over the past few years? Say 2000 and whenever the first strategy came out.
Great question. And it's good because I like how this Talanoa it goes both ways. And I really appreciate that question because for me, I had to start from when I first entered the IMO. I did not have a background in maritime diplomacy specifically. I had experiences with the COPs. I had experiences in all of these different climate negotiations, not specifically to the IMO shipping, but I had this background on cultural and performing arts with heritage, reconnections, identity studies, migration studies, along especially with case studies relating to the Pacific. And so when I first walked into the IMO, my first thing was, what is going on? How do I find my space? I really felt that as soon as I entered these negotiations, especially in the working groups, the IWGs, it really felt like a ship where in some way the captain has the final say and has the ultimate power, and that was sort of like the power dynamics in play. But not
what an analogy, John. I love it. We're on a ship already from the beginning. Go on.
Yeah, I mean, I saw firsthand, you see firsthand what, how the power shift plays and how the power game plays. And it's not only coalitions are a big part, I remember when the Shipping High Ambition Coalition was still in play between, the EU and Pacific countries. I looked at the beginnings of the six-pack, which is, the coalition of Pacific countries that grouped together to form this, and how the six-pack, which started from 6 Pacific countries, built to the six-pack plus, which integrated more countries into. And so we had some countries from Africa joining this coalition. We had countries from the Caribbean joining into this coalition. And the main thing we built with the six-pack plus was, shout out to the outreach team as well, that, constantly had those late night sessions, those outreach sessions, webinars, conferences, going out, to other countries. But not only sharing the same situation that we face, especially in maritime shipping in our respectable regions, but also to come together to form this cohesiveness and unified front that we have the same experiences, we face the same disproportionate negative impacts from shipping. And so at that time, like you said, it was a whole different time. This coalition that started from 6 built to the six-pack plus, which eventually led to one of the highlights being that 50 plus proposal on the carbon levy. And me walking in, I sort of had to, for almost a whole year, had to pause, just like you was, to sit down, listen, and just see the influences, and not only through coalitions, but just the influence of the industry as well. Not only through the observing members, but also the industry representation within states themselves. And so there are countries like For example, it's a one-on-one vote. Everyone has the same, that UN system. But what I saw behind the scenes, or the nuances, was shipping industry, like for example, the companies, shipping companies, but also registries have this major influence as well, that sometimes it's not on record formally, but you see the influences in the backyard rooms, the committee room negotiations, along the corridors, and that sort of like has a big impact on what the outcome is. And so for me, what I saw was the Pacific, or Oceania as I call Oceania, has sort of like this issue of making sure that we have the capacity, because I think it's the same in other fora, is there are a lot of conventions, at the IMO, maritime safety, GHG is one of them. And so the legal committee, TCC, all of these conventions. And so trying to find the capacity to cover all these issues has been one of the major, obstacles that we try to make sure that we cover. And one is we come all the way from the Pacific region and all the way to the IMO. And so for me, I'm not only looking at the struggles that we face, but I'm also looking at the morality and ethics of why these discussions are critical for not only the representatives at the IMO, but for the communities back at home. And so I try to always find the moral high ground approach to the discussions, and try to make sure that not only as representatives we come as negotiators, but we come as community knowledge holders. We come and represent our communities that face the brunt of not only the climate impacts, but also from shipping as well. And so for a transition in decarbonization in shipping to happen, always the first that are mostly impacted are the LDCs, the developing states.
Very specifically the Pacific as well, right? Like, you are in a very unique position that I would argue that other island states are in, but not as precarious as the Pacific. There's a reason that their voice has been so important in the climate space, and they have been pushing for Vanuatu's been pushing for that loss and damage fund since 1990. I think the rest of the world thinks we started to talk about this 5 to 6 years ago. No.
And the advisory opinion that they've done, but also just to see that the work behind, especially what Oceania has done, especially through the leadership of the Marshall Islands as well.
Absolutely.
Because not only through their leadership, but they also have the third largest shipping registry. So that holds weight and influence within the discussions themselves. And what I notice is whenever it comes to like votes, or whenever specific countries like the large registry countries, when they speak, everyone like listens. Because that power dynamic, not only through the state, but also through their registries, the industries, the developing, status of countries have power plays in that. But not only through them, you have the chair, you have the secretariat, the IMO system itself. And for me, when I first came in, one was trying to find where do I stand as someone from the Pacific, as Oceania, not only providing technical support to the people, our negotiators, but also trying to incorporate again, returning back to our upbringings and the value ethics of why we're here. And so what I try to do is to make sure that when our representatives come to these negotiations all the way from the Pacific, I want to make sure that not only are they there as negotiators, but they're there as cultural knowledge holders for their communities, especially in maritime shipping. And so I try to incorporate some form of culture, heritage, and that's where all these outreach Talanoa sessions have been coming in. And I think that was a big part of our outreach in holding these webinar or Talanoa sessions with a lot of countries, in sharing information and bringing them into spaces where their voices and their concerns were inclusive and were heard. And so creating, again, that's the power of, I think, the Pacific in incorporating its culture into these negotiations. And I found it inspiring. And so that's sort of like built my foundation of my presence and my where I stand at the IMO, but also to address in some way the nuances of colonial continuities that the IMO and the states hold. And I remember sharing a conversation with Ambassador Albany Shoda. Shout out to Ambassador Albany Shoda. Was the first time he walks into the IMO, he walks in with with his Marshallese necklace, and he's told by the security at the front to return back to the hotel and wear a tie.
Did they not understand what?
Exactly.
Don't blow my mind.
It was written on the New York Times, and so these were the kind of Talanoa sessions that really opened why I am at this space. And you can just see that was in 2015. That was in 2015. And then also...
That's not that long ago.
It's not that long ago. But to see these colonial continuities still exist within the system, within the UN system itself, it's something that I'm trying to explore, but also I'm trying to break down and reframe and relearn what, the IMO represents as this framework or this structure, not only physically, but also, its history of, basically it's in the Thames. Hundreds of years ago, the Thames were fully flooded with all of these merchant ships that were adding to this colonial era. And so I'm trying to unlearn and relearn what the IMO is and how that history, that colonial history, but also how it influences the current state of play, in the current negotiations on greenhouse gas shipping.
I mean, that's so important. I teach development studies, right? I have a whole week on colonization when it comes to development, but to understand what the identity of a culture comes from and how it is formed in that particular way. And I would, maybe I can say it three different ways. When it comes to these power dynamics you speak about, John, in the room, that's what I look at. Power and knowledge, how do they intersect and where does that get us? And when you're looking at the geopolitics of today and how that is playing out, sometimes there's so many ways I could talk about this.
Go.
I know. Okay, we can go on to the geopolitics of the Middle East in a second, because that just highlights how important shipping is, because I think people forget. But in terms of the reality and what the Pacific's, what you've already explained, bringing that storytelling in, it's like, it is true. The IMO is such a strict regulatory system that maybe doesn't necessarily easily adapt to the different Pacific way of being, but that's one of the massive added values of the Pacific and all these different environmental spaces, is that you bring in the stories. For example, when it comes to looking at sub-Saharan Africa or the Africa group as a whole, they bring into the UNFCCC space. My very first paper that came out a decade ago, was looking at moral legitimacy, how the Africa group can go into these spaces that are negotiating the Paris Agreement and literally bringing in that a moral legitimacy that at least until 2025 we had the most of the world had accepted, right? And then there was the other thing with the AOSIS countries, the Alliance of Small Island States countries. There was a talk I was given during COVID time on security, COVID, and islands. And I was on a panel with Dr. Hugh Seeley, who is a professor at from Barbados, but also an advisor to AOSIS at the time. And he explained, as a country like Barbados, when you're sitting in front of a country that's a much bigger economy than yours, and you know that they don't care about you, right? But you have to sit there and negotiate in those spaces in as good faith as you possibly can. The one thing AOSIS, a country like Barbados, can bring in with Mia Motley is a conscience into the negotiations. So here we have a moral legitimacy, a conscience, and the art of telling a story that are different ways that, for example, the EU is not used to dealing with, right? So they're like, this is not how we do. Unfortunately, a lot of the time that still plays out in that fashion, right? Because it gets down to the technicalities of what Article 6 means in terms of counting carbon credits, right? My whole thing about over the past 15 years is that we're trying to save the planet by counting carbon credits. I get it,
Exactly.
but this is not working. So we have to do it a different way.
And what's important is because at the root of this are the people, and that's sort of the people, not the shipping people that are involved in the sector, but also the communities themselves that are impacted by shipping. And so, again, back home, before I came on this journey at the IMO, whenever I'd hear something about shipping or the IMO, which was rarely even talked about back home, there is this kind of urge for me when I came into the space is, how do I tell a story of what happens at a space like the IMO with all of its technicalities? How do I translate that story into a story that can be told to the communities back home? And that's sort of like where my current methodology that I'm exploring, story living, where I try to tell a story through a living story that with living knowledge through the platforms of performance, ceremony, and practice. And so how do I translate that story into these three living mediums? Because those are the mediums in a way that help our people back home understand what's happening at the international level, but also at the regional level. Because what you don't want to do is, you don't want to go and when you talk to the people back home is you take this IMO report and say, here, this is what we're doing. This is what IMO doing. You're giving them like a 200-300 page report of all this credit. Our people back home won't understand, and that would cause a lot of disinterest, but also a lot of distrust in what exactly are you trying to do. You're going all the way to a place, going all the way to these international places, and you're negotiating, but we don't even understand what you're trying to negotiate. And so what I'm trying to do is, imagine if instead of giving either a presentation where someone's me and the presenter and the people, and there is this almost hierarchical situation within a space when you're trying to talk about the IMO. How about if you went back to the communities, you pulled out a mat, you pulled out the Talanoa, you pulled out the kava, you pulled out the guitar, and you incorporated discussions on what's happening at spaces like the IMO and regionally, but in a way that the community can relate with. And that's a big part of that is through story living. When you use the practice of Talanoa, you use the ceremony of kava ceremony, for example, and you use performance through music to bring people together. And I mean, you've seen that firsthand in the spaces that we do at the IMO, and that's almost a rootedness of what happens right from the community level being practiced at a space like the IMO, and we still hold that same rootedness in those spaces. And when you have that sincerity of really trying to use our rooted ceremonies, practices, and performances within a technical space, it'll be very new for some people, but it really brings out the humanity of what people are there for.
This is a whole podcast on just and equitable transition, and I feel like you just touched on it for the first time in our whole conversation. Of course, the entire thing is about that, but I think this is something, again, just for everyone. It's about real people. It's about real people's lives, whether it be an islander or a seafarer, and again, shipping has literally sailed under the radar for so long that we don't think of it, right? Like my students, I have a week now that I teach on just and equitable transition. And of course, my students are development students, but I'm forced them to listen to all of my maritime and shipping stuff all the time, because this is what I know, right? So this is the example of how and where and what a just and equitable transition means for people, even if they don't know it, right? And so it's hard, it's impossible for anyone to grasp what happens at these huge UN levels, apart from to criticize it and say they don't believe in it, or just to accept that it's there and then it's going, something will happen to them, maybe. But if you are able, John, to translate that into a dialogue that is understandable, consumable to two groups of people back home to go, oh, okay, well, I'll never go to London. I don't want to do that, but I do understand what JJ's doing in London, right?
But also what I'm doing here, and one of the highlights that has happened throughout my career with my work at the IMO was I had this opportunity, even in the Pacific, but also here in Europe, was at the University of Amsterdam, where I'm currently doing my PhD, was I had a session with my students, and I was talking to them about Oceania. I was talking to them about colonization, and the course that I was, being part of was this course called Decarbonization and Decolonization. And these are students at the University of Amsterdam. And so when I came into the classroom, maybe it's not the same everywhere, but it was something that was taught to me on a way of learning for our students. And so when I walked in, students were so shocked. They walked into this lecture room, and I'm sitting there on the mat. I pushed all the chairs and tables to the side. I brought a big mat. I bought my Talanoa. I bought my guitar. I bought the cover, and I was mixing. And all the students were like, wait, what's going on? Is this? And then I started to show them, not before going into these issues of decolonization, decarbonization, I included them first to partake in ceremony, practice, and again, I invited them to participate in story living. And so giving them this glimpse about what the Pacific is. And you should have seen the faces of the students.
I can imagine.
A lot of them were like, what? But this interest of, wow, to be, to take part in a practical way of learning where we're seated on a mat, we're grounded in the ethics of this ceremony, but we're also being exposed to the performance element in, gaining people's interest into this Talanoa space.
But you know what they're gaining? That they're gaining, John, is trust. What you're building is trust. And when you have a broken system, this is a key way of doing it before you even enter the halls of negotiation, is that you build that community and that trust between people, individuals, and countries.
Yeah, and what I wanted to ask you was, there have been a few times where I've seen, you bring your students to the IMO itself, and I was so happy that one time I got to speak to them. And so
Say that, I'm absolutely going to ask you to speak to them again in 2 weeks' time, John. Be careful what you wish for.
What were some of the reactions to your students when they come into a space? And sort of like, what are you trying to build with your students specifically about a space like the IMO?
It's to teach them these different spaces, right? That particular set of students that you're looking were Masters of Climate Change students.
Right.
And so there's not that many of them. And so they were just going, okay, again, not one of them has ever come up to me and said, I really want to work on shipping. But putting them in that space to understand what was happening, especially because that was on the Wednesday before the US, Saudi Arabia blew up the IMO negotiations 2 days later. So they got so invested in it. I loved it because basically I had them that day, the negotiations. The next morning, I was in there lecturing them, and the lecture was on justice. The week was on climate justice, and they were so interested. And one of them was like, so they just asked me about what happened at the end of the day in the negotiations, and my voice broke, and I started to well up. And I was like, this has never happened to me before in front of my students. But I was like, quite a little proud moment, right? Because it means so much to me what is happening in those spaces. So the students themselves, I think they were in awe of the things that were taking place, and that they were like kind of all of a sudden in the middle of, like, they weren't doing anything obviously, but they were in the middle of this space watching how these processes play out in real time. I think is an important way for them to have at least a first-hand glimpse into what was happening. And I have to say, since then, whenever I'm on a podcast or in conversations with people who are in the know in terms of politics and policy, that IMO negotiations is always brought up, right? And so, like, always. Like, that's what I did in Belém. I didn't do anything but going around and talk about what happened at the IMO. That's what people wanted to know, what's going on, what's happening there. And for the students to be able to have witnessed a tiny part of that is an incredible step forward. Now, they still haven't come to me and said that they're really interested in shipping, but one of them will one day.
But that's because I remember at one stage I was a student and being brought into the space, maybe not as a tour, but just I remember my first time was like, you either sink or swim. You're thrown in the deep end. You're going right into the negotiations as a delegate for one of the countries. And I remember it was myself, Brother John Taukave, Atina Shoots, all of these young students.
All my faves.
Yeah, exactly. Being put into these, into these spaces and just, and how our mentors already knew that we're going to put you in these spaces and you're going to sink or swim and we're here to support. Oh, that was like first one of the most overwhelming experiences, the first time being put into these negotiations, but it was an experience that I will absolutely be forever grateful for because it already paved the way for the next 10 years of where I would be or where my research would be going. And again, just shout out to all of the mentors, especially, in the Pacific. I remember it was Alban, it was Peter, it was Dr. Alison Newell, all of these mentors that were behind our backs, guiding us through each step of the way. Whenever we had questions or issues or whenever we felt overwhelmed, they were always there to support us. Again, and we always had briefings. Like, for example, every day when we're at the IMO, we always have these debriefs. And these debriefs don't have to be, we're in a committee room. Sometimes, at the end of the day, we just go and share a bowl of kava and we're just talking about our experiences. And it was really helpful, especially for me, to go sit down at the end of a negotiation day and just Talanoa with my mentors and just constantly getting this advice and, along the way. And they're telling me stories and it's inspiring me because these are stories that I want to create for myself and what kind of legacy I would like to leave for the next generation of young Pacific negotiators that are brought into this space. And so currently we now have a new group of young students that are being brought into this space, and I'm so happy that, man, makes me feel old, but myself, John, we're there to guide these young students along the way. It's overwhelming for them, but they have that support system, and I'm very grateful for that. And they're learning along the way. Just 2 weeks ago, we had one of our young students do a presentation in one of our webinars. Last week, we had a webinar about Pacific technologies for shipping in the Pacific, and one of our young interns, played a song to introduce the session. And so they're slowly being brought into the space and they're learning, trial and error, but it's all part of the experience. And that's sort of like the experience that I had. And moving on, we can go on and on because these are passionate topics that I love because it's part of my research, but it's also part of my story. You have this, I'd like to say, this really well-known podcast that you've been doing, the UCL podcast there, and I was so thankful on one of your episodes to be one of them. I wanted to ask, what was the reason behind doing a podcast behind shipping, one, and two was, what was some of the key highlight episodes that really struck you?
So to start on a downer note, John, the podcast is over. This is I'm looking at what's the next, but there will be another podcast. There'll be something else. I've gotten a taste for it. But yes, they decided with all their wisdom, to no longer fund the podcast. So that finished end of last year, but it went for 5 seasons.
It was really good.
Yeah, really good. It was really good. It was incredibly well done, incredibly well edited. It highlighted and showcased work being done at the University College London across the board on climate change.
Yep.
So not just shipping. It was like there were lots of different episodes on all kinds of things. It started as a reaction to these climate conferences that we talk about. That and the climate crisis is one of the grand challenges of UCL, and so we were very pleased with the podcast. It was one of the most popular ones in UCL, and it's hard to get sometimes academic podcasts, or it's hard to get the word out there a lot of the time. But no, I was proud of it. It was very interesting to have certain negotiators, for example, at the IMO coming up and going, when's the next episode? And I was like, you listen to my little podcast? Okay.
Low key, bro, low key. your podcast was one of the big inspirations why I carried on my podcast. Bro,
I'm very pleased with that.
It was really, I really loved it, and that's one of the reasons why I wanted to carry out this Jet podcast. And there you go. Just wanted to highlight that.
But thank you. But also, this is what we've been having this conversation for the past 12 months. So for those of you who haven't listened to it yet, it came out 12 months ago. We had JJ on as a guest. He also sang a song called Oceans in English. Was it? Vohis, and I tried to remember it the other day.
How many years? Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay. And Eldine, another member of the Micronesian Center for Sustainable Transport, was on there with you. And I thought, that's got to be my favorite podcast, right? My favorite episode, just because this is why we talked about this afterwards. As it's so natural having this conversation with someone like yourself, and that's what it should be. A podcast should be a conversation, right? But it was also, if you remember, we did it in the Saturday or Sunday in the middle, in between the ISWG and the MEPC. So we didn't know what the outcomes were yet.
Yes.
So we were like full throttled in the negotiations. And so it helped explain to a wider public. You just said about going back to the islands and explaining and helping people understand what you're doing at the IMO and what the IMO is doing to shipping. It's the same thing. Most of the time, when I bring up shipping, people don't know what I'm talking about. When I say the IMO, they don't even know what's in London. This is it really. And so I have friends that live in Vauxhall that had no idea what this big building with the ship out the front did. That's a genuine thing. Yeah. And maybe they shouldn't, right? This is maybe our job to do. But at the same time, when you have one of the things that the importance of having a podcast is to get a message out as well. This is why for that episode, it's the one I called, if you remember, our Talanoa podcast, because I wanted this to be a sharing of stories and experiences in order to understand the real technical aspects behind something like what we were, the net zero framework that we were in the negotiations about. So, this was that was a wonderful episode. I think that would be one on top three, but I honestly loved most of them, whether we're talking about British energy security or we're looking at the different climate conferences. It brought an aspect, and you bring the knowledge about what's happening in these spaces to a wider audience as well, which is what you're doing here.
Right here, there's a link to the podcast. Please go and check it out. All of the episodes right here. This is our editors right here. Can you see it?
It might be over, but you have 40 episodes to listen to.
Yeah, exactly. They're there. They're there. It's accessible for people to go and listen to all of the different conversations that are happening around that space. And so now we're moving into the IMO, ISWG, and MEPC. And so for you, when you're going to these upcoming meetings, what are some of the most important elements that you're trying to look out for, especially in terms of the net zero framework, coalitions, and about the framework as well?
I think my position will be to absolutely look at the geopolitics that are playing out in the room. I think that's my added value in these spaces, to look and to understand, especially after what happened last October.
Oh yeah, share. How did you feel about last October?
We were all furious, right? So basically, for those of you who are listeners who haven't heard or don't listen, basically last October, the Saudi Arabia and the Gulf states, that coalition, along with the United States, tried to shut down the discussion around adoption of the net zero framework.
At an extraordinary session, yeah.
An extraordinary set, exactly. And we had the day before the adoption was to take place, some orange guy in the White House, whose name shall not be mentioned, I hate saying this, but truth socialed at the world, telling what's happening at the IMO in London to stop, to stop this greening of shipping, basically, in no uncertain terms. So you have Donald Trump doing that. You have different delegations then negotiating. So what normally happens. Well, so if you were in the UNFCCC, as you know, John, this is a negotiating based around consensus, right? Yes. So this means that everyone in the room has to come up and agree on something, which can mean a race to the bottom, but it also can build a community. And the IMO isn't like that. The IMO can be called, a vote can be called. And the IMO is based on 2/3 majority vote, I believe, right? Yeah. And so that means that if a vote is called, then you can see who's on what side of the argument. Now, what has been happening over the past couple of decades at the IMO is they try to avoid that. They try to do it on consensus because that builds trust amongst the countries in the room, first of all. And second of all, frankly, countries are much more likely to do what they say they're going to do if they've agreed upon it, right? If something's being forced upon them, they're not going to do that. So that's the first thing. So what happened last year when Saudi Arabia called the vote was that we saw the cracks in the room, and country after country had to stand up and vote yes, no, abstain, or not be there physically present as well. So there were even cracks within the EU, right? We saw that, and we need to get past this. So I don't know what's going to happen at the upcoming sessions because they postponed it. So what happened at the end is that they postponed it for 12 months to October of this year, which meant two things. One, that what they could do in the next sessions is that every time someone tries to bring it up, they could shut it down and say, we're not supposed to be talking about this. And so we'll see how that plays out. First of all, the most important part of the current state of affairs in terms of this net zero framework, I really hope they don't throw it out. It's important to get something across the board. And again, if we talked to us 12 months ago, JJ, that's what we were talking about was having a greater ambition. Now we're talking about just having anything. That is the most frustrating thing. And I want to I literally verge of tears sort of situation, because this is not where we should be, and it's not where we needed to be, and even the industry is ready and willing to do this, right? So but now we're in a situation where we are looking at the common lowest denominator potentially. Yes. And that's not a good thing to think about. But regardless of all of this, when you look at what before last October, there was a set of dates and deadlines between 2030, 2040, and 2050. Now, 2030 was always going to be difficult to reach those targets, but now it's impossible. You can't delay action on this and then think that we can catch up. We can't, not in this particular period of time. And okay, we can accept that that's now the reality of what we're living in, but then how do we move forward, and how do we understand where we need to get to in those 2030, 2035, whatever point plan you need to look at. Lots of countries in the room, regardless of what's happening at the IMO, we are moving this forward. Yep. Countries will move this forward. China's maybe keeping a backseat at the moment, or not being as loud, even though it's their proposal. Yep. But you think that China's not working on their own trading scheme or whatever? They are. The Europeans already have one. This is good. The US is doing it. It's just what we don't want is this fractured. So we have something inside. It drives me nuts when it comes to environmental stuff, because that before Paris, that was what I was living in Kenya, doing my PhD in Kenya. And so looking and working and talking to the different factions, Kenya had proposed, for example, twice that they would create a world environmental organization similar to the WTO, the trade organization, but that would have more teeth than UNEP, the environmental program. And under that particular time, if you looked, there was something like 500 to 600 different bilateral and multilateral environmental treaties around the world. They wanted to bring them under one because there were so many that are doing the same thing, or not enough, or no one knows what's going on, and they were like, there's just too much of this happening. We need to avoid that at all costs in this space. So back to your question of what I'm going to be looking for, I'm going to be seeing, okay, how is the U.S. reacting or acting? How are the Gulf countries, probably again led by Saudi Arabia? Who's in the room? Who is coming to this session? That is Bahrain there? Is Oman there? Like, who is coming? If you look at then the Caribbeans, who's coming after what happened last October? Are they're like, it's actually better if we don't come at all? I don't know. And the other thing is, if you look at the African countries, for example, all of these aspects of food security, all of these things are going to raise their head, and they don't want to be taxed on that, right? So they're completely fragmented as well. And so I will be interested to talk to a lot of them to see where they're planning to go. But to turn this back on you then, John, what are you looking for? What are you expecting? Or is there something that what's your role going to be?
I mean, first thing is, I still don't know what the current state of play. I have an idea of what may or may not happen. There's still a lot of uncertainty. We know that the opposition, the other side, the petrostates, the US, they have a fixed position on what they want, but they also have proposals, but they have the other sort of united front. But I'm looking at also, we created this Net Zero Friends group, and within the Net Zero Friends group, as I mentioned, there are different goals that each of the groups within this Net Zero Friends group have and are willing to compromise for. And so that's something that I'm trying to look out for, but it's also something that I'm trying to just make sure that our representatives that go there, they are aware of the current state of play. We had a workshop last week, briefing our Pacific delegations on what's on the table, what to expect, what not to expect, and how to be prepared for the unexpected. And so that's something that I'm trying to look out for is, will the net zero framework survive? Will there even be an extraordinary session? Will there be, again, another delay for who knows whether if it's accepted, whether it's a tacit or explicit acceptance, these kinds of things these are the things that I'll be watching out for.
And so those are the coalitions that I'll be looking out for too. So to avoid that happening, to see what the EU, China, Brazil, these different larger delegations that can hold sway. Not that everyone can have their own sway, but like that, how we can counterbalance that argument that we should scrap this, because that's not an argument to be had. Yeah. And Arsenio Dominguez, the Secretary General of the IMO, has been going around saying this a lot, because the countries all agreed to do this 3 years ago. Let's do it.
Exactly.
Right?
I mean, that's all from the revised strategy. What all we agreed to do. We should have been done with this. We should have been on this, continuous path towards adoption.
Yes, we should be doing it, not just adopting something. We should be actually implementing.
Exactly. We have the time frames. We have the pathway that the IPCC had set out. We're currently not, with the current trajectory, we're not even on a 1.5 pathway. Yeah. And so I'm curious to see what's going to unfold from these discussions, and will there ever be action, or will it be just in the future and this continuous repetition of inertia and delay and postponement to the whole framework overall?
But that's not a story you want to take back to the islands, right? So that's
exactly
so this, and that's the case for many countries. That was the case with Paris, right? When the countries I was working with across sub-Saharan Africa was the same. They wanted to bring home something to say that we did it.
Yes.
As well as all of the other parts of the world, but I was working with the Africa group.
And mind you, the net zero framework was a compromise that the Pacific states had come towards.
Yes, right? That's the most frustrating part. We already compromised, and now
we brought up the levy. Which was the universal carbon levy that was the best way forward for this. So, but more to come, when we Talanoa at the IMO.
There you go.
We want to get our audience a bit interested here. If I know our audiences know, and Dr. Simon Chin Yee, the name of this podcast is called a Just and Equitable Transition Talanoa podcast. So for you, what does a just and equitable transition mean for you?
For me, it is on three levels. A just and equitable transition in terms of let's start with shipping.
Yes.
Is that so that all countries can move along the pathway together, and I hate keep saying the words the UN speak, no one left behind, because we leave people behind all of the time. All of the time. We have to stop that. And the only way we can look and move in a just and equitable way is that if we share the knowledge, the know-how, the technologies, the energy systems, all of these things that we're willing to do, but it needs to be done together. One of my big fears after October last year was that you will have some countries that are developing countries that will be like, oh, okay, maybe we take a step back and we'll just let the other things happen. The problem with that is that things are happening.
Yes.
And so instead of being part of the discussion, things are going to be going on without them, and they are going to be left behind. And all of a sudden, they're going to be stuck with the old fleets, with ports that aren't retrofitted to accept green transition fuels. Do you know what I mean? So this is what that means in that very particular way, that if you are an island state, let's say, but any sort of developing country that doesn't have the capacity to do this, if you are not working with a group of other countries so that like, oh, okay, so we need to do this, what do we need? Yeah. All those countries, they know what they need, but they have to be part of the discussion. And so frequently they're left out of the discussion. They're not even invited into the rooms, right, to discuss these things because they're not the big players, whatever that may mean. The second is that international level, right? And so this is, it's funny because a just transition came out of workers' rights back in the 60s, right? This whole idea of workers' rights. And so in that larger scale, though, I'm hearing this term, a transitioning in a way of fossil fuels in various forms across different UN organizations. I don't follow it that closely, but it is an interesting way where they're also moving along this. So my problem with that is, and this is part of my academic research, is that throughout the 80s and the 90s, we talked about environmental justice. Then we come into the 2010s and it's all about climate justice. And now it's all about a just and equitable transition. Why? Because we haven't solved the problem. Because of the colonial structures that have been put in place forever have kept countries in the systems that they are stuck in, and we keep renaming it whatever, but it's because we haven't done anything, because inequality is worse now than it was before, right? The poverty is worse now than it was before. So how can we can't say that we've done it if we haven't addressed it. And then the third part is that worker, is the people in the islands, the person on the seafarer, the port worker, the miner, whoever that may be, so that we understand that these are real people with real lives, real families, real jobs, and that need to be not to start this an hour and 20 minutes into our discussion, John, to bring up the Strait of Hormuz. But I'm bringing up the Strait of Hormuz and the Gulf because at some point 20,000 seafarers were stuck.
Yeah.
First.
Yeah.
Second, to avoid the Strait of Hormuz, a lot of the cargo ships were going around Africa. Yeah. That added 40 days to trip. That's not a just and equitable transition. Nope. That is not just for those seafarers. You can't just add 40 days to a trip, but apparently you can. So this is something that we need to. Those are several of the things that what a just and equitable transition means. I think for me.
Amazing. And so now, guys, we're gonna tone it down a notch. We've been like really into deep Talanoa, and we're gonna tone it down a notch.
I just want to say, John said before this we weren't going to be political, but then you invite me on. It's impossible.
Now we're gonna go a little. We're gonna pull it down a little bit, and I call this section the Recover Corner, REKAVA corner. And so you've been in our Talanoa sessions, you've been in the cover ceremonies. I want you to share with the people what was your first impression when you were in the Talanoa space, and second, what did you think about the cover?
Oh my goodness. Okay, so my first Talanoa at the IMO, or my first Talanoa at all?
Both. IMO and overall.
So I've never been to Oceania, or at least the Pacific Islands of Oceania. So I haven't experienced it in real form in that space. In UNFCCC in 2017, I can't remember which year. That was my first experience within that. But I didn't have the feeling that you bring to it, John, because those spaces at the IMO, again, they're so much more closed, and there's so much. I love it because what you do is you bring different people from different countries into a space where they can share their stories, and I think that's an important part of building community and trust and understanding. First of all, the kava itself, I love the ceremonial aspect of it, and I will always partake in it, of course. The tingling sensation that it leaves on my lips, it's always a bit, I was always surprised by it. I'm always surprised by it. But as a diplomatic tool to share, I'm here for it.
Shout out. Yep. Absolutely. Shout out to the very diplomatic answer, I may say. Thanks, guys. And so we're going towards the end, Simon. I really appreciate it. Thank you for this whole Talanoa and knowledge sharing that we've just had. Now we're moving into this sort of, I like to call it a fun part. It's called rapid fire. Meaning you only have one sentence to answer these rapid fire questions. Are you ready?
I am ready. Let's go.
All right, first one. Coffee or tea?
Always tea.
Okay. Best book you've ever read?
Gerald Durrell's My Family and Other Animals. When I was 5.
Star Wars or Star Trek?
Always Star Wars.
Yeah! Okay. Window or aisle seat?
Aisle seat, 100%.
Okay. Ooh. Consensus or voting?
Consensus.
Okay. Best film of all time?
Oh, word. Oh, now I've got to think of names. Best film of all time, The Shining.
Pause. Explain. What about The Shining? Is this the horror one?
It's just like, what?
Is this the horror one?
Yes. Well, yeah. I mean, it's horror, but it's very much Johnny's inside the house, right? You put me on the spot, and the only other thing I could think of was Godfather, and I didn't want to be as cliche, but I think probably The Shining is probably as cliche. No, it's watching Jack Nicholson at his best, where they go into it's I don't know. Growing up, it was just one of my favorite films. Not as a kid, that 8-year-old never watched that, but as an 18-year-old, I became sort of obsessed by those sorts of films. But and I'm not a horror film person.
Okay.
Not at all. But this one was good. When I was 19, I lived out in Banff National Park in the west of Canada, and that's where it was filmed. So I think maybe that is also, it plays, the hotel there, the main hotel there is the hotel they filmed it in. And I think that plays into my lore as well.
Shout out to The Shining, man. Okay, next one. Ready?
Yes.
Academic or negotiator?
For myself?
Yeah.
An academic working with negotiators.
Okay. Most intense, ISWG or MEPC?
ISWG. I mean, it's one or you're asking that they're both.
They're both, yeah.
They're both. But I think in the ISWG you can get some more stuff done, so.
Okay. Disruption or gradual change?
Disruption. It depends on what we're disrupting and how we're disrupting it, but I'm here for the gradual change, but I prefer a disruptor.
Wind propulsion or green fuels?
I'm gonna go wind propulsion.
Okay, last one. Hope or realism?
Hope, always hope.
Oh.
But we can be realist in our hope.
Yes, absolutely. Guys, we have now reached the final one. This is the final one, Simon, and I really appreciate your time. This is the last one. Share with the audience, share with our fellow jetters,
what are your top 5 music tracks on your playlist right now?
Oh my! Now you're going to call me out for something. Oh no!
Top 5 right now.
Okay, let me
share with the people. So say one and pause. We're gonna let our editors play a little bit and do a little bit of dancing to it.
Okay, wait 1 second. Let me find.
Who are your top 5 in your playlist?
But it's going to be the same. So my number 1.
Yes.
Is
Wait, start from 5. Start from 5.
Oh, 5. Okay, this is all very. I've been listening to a lot of reggaeton.
Ooh,
so the 5 is.
Go.
Huh?
Reggaeton. Okay, who's number 5?
Number 5 is Maluma's Hawaii. It's from a couple of years ago.
Okay, pause. Let the music play a little bit. Our editors are gonna put that in. All right, number 4.
Number 4 is even further back, 20 years ago, La Tortua, Shakira with Alejandro Sanz.
Ooh, shout out to Shakira. Play a little bit of there. Let's go. Number 3.
One Day, Dua Lipa and Bad Bunny.
Ooh, shout out. That's a good one. Shout out to Bad Bunny and Dua Lipa, One Day. Number 2.
So number 2 is Karol G. You're making me speak Spanish. This is not going well. Si antes te hubiera conocido. Oh, God. Edit that out, please.
Shout out. That's clear. And your number 1.
And my number 1 is Debbie Tiramas Photos by Bad Bunny. Come on, I've been obsessed since the Super Bowl. But actually, it was my number 1 streamed album of last year anyway.
Let's go. Guys, thank you guys so much. This is a Just and Equitable Transition Talanoa podcast with Traveling Diplomat JJ. I'm here with Dr. Simon Chin Yee. Brother Simon, thank you so much for your time. Enjoy and stay tuned. Jet now, jet tomorrow, and jet for the future. Chee-hoo!